Hello and welcome to our next Pamper project. This one is the Amarie Earwarmer. For this particular project I used 10 ply cotton, 100% from Bendigo Woolen Mills, with a 5mm crochet hook, pair of scissors, darning needle and some stitch markers. Grab your materials, let's get started. To begin this earwarmer, you need to chain 70. I'm going to follow the pattern to make it less confusing for anybody following along, but you can adjust it by adding or subtracting multiples of 7 to make it fit whatever size you would like. To chain, I just put the yarn over my hand like this, hold it in place with my lower fingers, thumb at the top, wrap it around to form an X, keep going. Hook goes under the first strand over the second and I pull that through. I lift it up while releasing my fingers down. And now we chain 70. 1, 2, 3. One thing I do to help keep my tension consistent is I lift my thumb up every 3 chains. 4, 5, 6, and so on. 7, 8, 9, 10. You can pause the video here, create your 70 chains, and I will see you at the end of this foundation chain. Just completing my foundation chain, I've done 67 chains, 68, 69, 70. Now all I need to do to complete it is to make sure that my chain is not twisted. So I'm just going to stretch it out, bring it between my thumb and finger, and I'm happy with that. Got the last chain there. Just going to bring my hands in so that they meet, and I'm going to slip stitch into that very first chain. So slip stitching straight into here. Yarn over, bring that through, and bring that through. Again, that completes the foundation chain. For row 1, we're going to be doing half double crochets into every chain around our foundation chain. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tail and I'm going to place that on top of my foundation chain, and I'm going to crochet straight over the top so that I don't have to sew it in at the end. So to begin, we chain 1, and we're going to do a half double crochet to the base of that stitch, which is this space here. This is the chain that we slip stitched into. This is our first chain of our foundation row, so this is the one we're going to work into. To do a half double crochet, yarn goes over the hook, we're going into that chain here. In I go. I'm going to make sure that my tail is over the top as well. Yarn goes over the hook and I bring that back through my work. I have 3 loops on my hook now. Yarn goes over the hook and I bring that through all 3 loops. That's how you do a half double crochet. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a stitch marker to the top of that stitch, onto the top of that first half double crochet, so I know where my first stitch of the round is. Now I can continue on. This is the chain that I've already worked into. Get that out of the road. Chain I've already worked into, so now I'm going to work into the next chain. With my chain I'm only picking up 1 loop. So in I go. I have my tail hanging over the top. Yarn goes over and I bring that through. Yarn over again and through all 3 loops on my hook. So I'm going to be continuing to do half double crochets all the way around my foundation chain until I reach the end. What I recommend you do here is pause the video, continue to do your half double crochets into every stitch, and I will see you when you get closer to the end of this round. Just completing my first round. I've done 67 half double crochets, 68, 69 and 70. And before you join, you should always count and make sure you do have the right amount so that you know whether you're on track. From here, I need to slip stitch into the first half double crochet of the round, which I marked with a stitch marker. So I'm going to slip stitch into here. And that completes my round. One thing I find very useful is to mark the last stitch of the round as well. So this is where I just slip stitch, so I'm not going to mark that, I'm going to mark this one. This will help me to know when to finish the end of round 2. For round 2 we're going to be doing half double crochets all the way around, just like we did in the previous round. However, this time we're going to be working in the third loop. So I'm just going to show you what the third loop looks like. If we move to the middle of the round, this would be one of our half double crochets, this stitch here. And the thing about a half double crochet is it gives us a third loop at the back. So if you turn and look at the top of the stitch, you've got your first loop, known as the front loop. Second one here is called the back loop, but if you keep turning, you'll notice a third loop behind your work. This is the loop that we want to work in. So to start this round, back to the start, we begin by chaining one, and we want to find the third loop of our first half double crochet. This is our first half double crochet here, this stitch. This is our slip stitch we use to join and our chain, so that doesn't count. Our first half double crochet is here. If we look at this stitch, we've got our front loop, we've got our back loop. If we keep turning it over, you'll see our third loop as well, this one here. That is the one we want to work into. So what we're going to do is yarn over our hook. We're going to turn it around. We've got our front loop, back loop, keep turning. There is our third loop. That's what we want to work into. Yarn over our hook, bring it out, yarn over through all 3 loops. This is the first stitch of our round, so I'm going to add a stitch marker to the top of this one so we know where to join our work. And now we continue. Another half double crochet into our next stitch. Front loop, back loop, keep turning it around. There is our third loop. That's what we want to work into. And you'll notice as you do more of these stitches that your work will automatically begin to turn forward, making it easier for you to find the third loop each time. The other thing that you'll notice about working into the third loop of these stitches is that it turns our work forward and provides us with this nice effective line on our work. So for this round, I recommend pausing the video here. Continue to do your half double crochets into the third loop of every stitch, and I will rejoin you when you get closer to the end of this round. Just completing row 2 with my last few half double crochets into the third loop. And what I've done here is I've put a stitch marker into my last half double crochet, so I know this is the last one I need to work into for this round. And the thing that makes that important is, as you can see here, this is our slip stitch to the start and our first chain, not actual stitches that we need to work into. That's why I recommend using a stitch marker for the last stitch of the round as well as the first, so it makes it easier for you to keep track of where you need to be working. To finish off, we slip stitch into our very first half double crochet for this row. That completes row 2. As you can see, a very effective line around our work. For row 3, we're working into the third loop again of our stitches, but this time we're only doing single crochets. So to begin with, here's my first stitch. So I'm going to turn that around before I start so I can find that third loop. There it is there. That's the one I'm going to want to work into first. So to start with, I chain one, then I need to find that third loop. Here it is, and I'm doing a single crochet. I'll be doing a single crochet into every stitch all the way around. Because this is the first stitch of my round, I'm going to mark it with a stitch marker, so when I complete this round I'll know where to join my work. I'm doing a single crochet into the third loop of every stitch all the way around. One thing to take note of is to work into the larger loops, not these small little ones. That's just the edges of the stitches. So just into these larger loops all the way around. You can pause the video here, continue doing your single crochets into the third stitch, into the third loop, and I will meet you when you get back around towards the end of this round. Just completing the third round, doing my last few single crochets. And I've marked my last stitch, so I know this is the last single crochet that I need to do. I'm going to mark it again. As you can see, we've got our slip stitch over and chain into our stitch. None of these we work into. So all I need to do now to complete round 3, slip stitch back into the very first stitch of the round. And that completes our third round. And as you can see, quite an effective looking band. I've decided before beginning round 4 that I'm going to change my yarn colour just to give it a little bit of something different. So all I need to do here is undo that last stitch that I did, which was a slip stitch. I'm going to repeat it, but this time I'm going to change my yarn colour and bring my new yarn through. Now that I have my new yarn, I'm ready to begin round 4. For round 4 this involves puff stitches, but we start by chaining 3. 1, 2, 3. We're then going to be doing a double crochet into the next stitch. So this counts as our first double crochet, so we do not need to work into the same stitch anymore. We go to the next one and we do a double crochet into there. And what I will do is I'll mark the third chain of my chain 3 at the start, because that will now become my first stitch. So after I've done my next double crochet, I'm going to skip 2 stitches, 1, 2, and into this next stitch here I'm going to do a puff stitch. So I'm going to show you what a puff stitch looks like. To do a puff stitch, you put your yarn over your hook, you go into your work, yarn over, bring that back, and I raise my hook up a little bit just so there's a bit of room between the hook and the yarn, which makes it easier to bring the yarn through at the end. So again, yarn over, into the hook, yarn over, bring that back, that's twice, yarn over, into the hook, yarn over, bring that back 3 times, and we should now have 7 loops on our hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What we do now is yarn over and we bring that hook through all 7 loops. We then chain 1 to close our puff stitch. That's our first puff stitch done. We need to do 2 more into the exact same stitch. So again, yarn over the hook, into that same stitch, yarn over, bring it back, lift your hook up a little bit, yarn over, into that stitch, yarn over, bring it back, yarn over, into that stitch, yarn over, bring that back, and we should have 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yarn over, bring that through all 7 loops, and chain 1 to close. One more time. So we put our yarn in, our hook into our work 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Yarn over, bring that through, and chain 1 to finish. So that's our first cluster of puff stitches completed. Now what we're going to do is skip 2 stitches again. So this one here is our very next stitch. I'm going to make sure you see it and you don't jump over it and assume this one is. This is the one we worked into. This is our next stitch. Sometimes it gets hidden under your puff stitches, so make sure you look for it. So skip 2, 1, 2, and then we're going to do a double crochet into the next 2 stitches. So 1 into this stitch. That's my double crochet. If you're not sure of that, yarn goes over the hook, into the stitch, yarn over, bring it back, yarn over through 2 loops, yarn over through the next 2 loops. And this becomes our repeating pattern. From here, we're going to skip 2 stitches again, 1, 2, and in the next one, we're going to do our puff stitch. That's 3 puff stitches, our cluster, just like we did here. I'm going to show you how to do that just one more time. Yarn over the hook, into the stitch, yarn over, bring it back, raise it a bit, yarn over, back into the stitch, yarn over, bring that back, yarn over, back into the stitch, yarn over, bring that back, yarn over through all 7 loops, and chain 1 to finish. I'm going to recommend you pause the video here and you continue with this pattern all the way around. So you'll need to do 2 more puff stitches into this same stitch, skip 2 stitches, 1, 2, 2 double crochet into the next 2 stitches, 1 in here, 1 in here, skip 2 stitches again, and another cluster of puff stitches. So pause the video here, continue repeating that pattern, and I'll see you when you get closer to the end of this round. Just completing round 4, I've done my last cluster of puff stitches, and I need to skip 2, 1, 2, which is the last stitch of the round, so I know my stitch count is correct. Remove that, and slip stitch into our first stitch, which is our chain 3. So I want to slip stitch into the top of that chain 3. And that completes my round 4, which you can see provides a really nice and effective pattern of cluster stitches and double crochets. Round 5 involves a whole lot of double crochets. So to begin, we're going to slip stitch to the space between our chain 3 and our double crochet from the previous round. So hook goes through this space, grab the yarn, bring it back and straight through that loop on our hook. From here we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and that's going to count as our first double crochet for the round. Going to add a stitch marker to the top of that chain so I know where to join up when I complete the round. We're going to do 4 more double crochets into this same space. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now what we do is jump over to our cluster of puff stitches. We're going to do a double crochet in between these puff stitches. So I'm going to put my hook into that space there, yarn over, in I go, 1 double crochet in there, and 1 double crochet in between the next 2 puff stitches as well. and this becomes our repeating pattern. So every time I see the 2 double crochets together, I'm going to do 5 double crochets into that space. Every time I see a cluster of puff stitches, I'm going to do a double crochet between the first 2 and a double crochet between the next 2. So continue with this pattern all the way around, and I will see you at the end of this round. Just completing round 5. I've just done my 5 double crochets in between the 2 double crochets from the previous round. So all I need to do now is my last double crochet in between the first lot of puff stitches, and one more double crochet between the next 2 puff stitches, and then to finish I just need to slip stitch into the first double crochet of the round, which was our chain 3. So I'm going to remove this stitch marker and I'm going to put it over here on top of my last double crochet, so I know where my next round ends, and I just need to slip stitch into the top of that chain, and that ends round 5. Round 6 is the same as round 4 with our puff stitches and double crochets. The only thing that makes it different is knowing where to place everything. So let's begin. To start with, we need to slip stitch between our first and second double crochets. So slip stitch straight into that space. Slip stitch again between the second and third. From here, we're going to do a chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and this counts as our first double crochet of the round. So I'm going to add a stitch marker to the top of that chain so I know where to join at the end. We're going to do a double crochet between our third and fourth double crochets of this shell stitch. So we've got a double crochet between our second and third double crochets, and another double crochet between our third and fourth. Again, as with our previous row, when we see 2 double crochets, we're going to do a cluster of puff stitches. So to remind you of that, yarn goes over into the stitch, yarn over, bring that back, give it a bit of height. We do that 3 times, 1, 2, 3. Yarn over, bring that through all 7 loops on the hook, chain 1 to close that off. We do that another 2 times. 1, 2, 3, chain to close. 1, 2, 3, and now we have our repeating pattern, chain that to close, where we're going to do a double crochet between the second and third double crochets of our shell stitch, and another double crochet between the third and fourth. We're going to skip all the way over to our pairing of double crochets and do a cluster of puff stitches in there, so 3 puff stitches. Skip over again between our second and third, a double crochet, and between our third and fourth a double crochet. Skip over to our pair of double crochets and do a cluster of puff stitches into that space. So pause the video here, continue to repeat that pattern all the way around, and I will see you when you get close to the other side. Just completing round 6, and I did my last cluster of puff stitches into the last space between the last 2 double crochets, which I had marked with a stitch marker. So now all I need to do to finish this row is slip stitch back into the first double crochet of the round, which was a chain 3. So I'm just going to slip stitch into the top of this chain, completes round 6. For round 7, we're going back to our band, very similar rows. So this next row is half double crochets. Because we're going back to the band, I've changed colours again to my original colour, and I just done that by undoing the last stitch and then slip stitching again with the new watermelon colour. The only other thing that I did was add a stitch marker to the second loop of my last puff stitch. When you create a puff stitch, you end up with a bigger loop on top, which is where the actual stitch forms, and we chain one to close it. So I've just added a stitch marker into the top of that chain one, so I know where this round ends. For this round, we're doing half double crochets. So to begin, we chain one, and then we do a half double crochet into that same space, which is the top of the chain that we slip stitched into. This is my first stitch of the round, so I'm going to add a stitch marker to make note of that. From here, we're doing a half double crochet into the top of the next double crochet from our previous round. As I explained, each puff stitch gives us 2 loops, a bigger loop, which is where the stitch forms, and a smaller stitch, which is the chain to close it. For this round, we work into the first loop, bigger one, half double crochet between the 2 puff stitches, and we're going to do a half double crochet into the second loop, which is the little chain to close it on top, half double crochet between the 2 puff stitches again, and a half double crochet into the second loop, that chain on top, which closes it. And that is our repeating pattern. So again, half double crochet into the next 2 double crochet stitches, into that one, into that one. I'll show you once more how we do that over the puff stitch. We go into the first loop, which is the bigger stitch, half double crochet between those 2 puff stitches, half double crochet into the second loop, the smaller one, half double crochet between those 2 puff stitches again, and half double crochet into that second loop, that smaller chain. That's what you need to repeat all the way around. So continue doing that, half double crochet into the tops of the next double crochets, half double crochet into the bigger loop, in between the smaller loop, in between the smaller loop, and back to the double crochets. Continue doing that all the way around, and I'll see you when you get closer to the end. Just completing round 7, and I've got my last cluster of puff stitches to go. So half double crochet into the first loop of the first puff, half double crochet between first and second puff, half double crochet into the second loop, the second puff, half double crochet between the second and third puff, and I added a stitch marker into the last chain. So I'm going to undo that, half double crochet into that second loop of the last puff stitch, and then all I need to do is slip stitch back into my first double crochet of the round. And what I will do now is add that stitch marker back to my last half double crochet, which was this stitch here. This is my slip stitch, this is the half double crochet. That's the one I want to note with my stitch marker. That completes round 7. We're about to begin round 8. Round 8 and 9 is exactly the same as our round down here, where we did half double crochets into the third loop of the previous round. So to do that, we need to find our first half double crochet, which is this stitch here, the one we did our slip stitch into, going to turn that over and identify our third loop. So our front loop, back loop, if we keep turning, we'll see this space here is our third loop. That is the one that we're going to want to work into. So grab my yarn, we chain one, yarn over, work that around, front loop, back loop, keep going, there's my third loop, and we half double crochet into here. This is my first stitch of the round, so I'm going to add a stitch marker to mark that. Now I'm going to continue doing my half double crochets into the third loop of each stitch. So my next stitch is here, front, back, keep turning, there's my third loop. Just as we did before, half double crochet into the third loop of every stitch. You can pause the video here, continue doing your half double crochets into the third loop, and I'll see you when you get towards the end of this round. Just finishing off round 8 with my last few half double crochets into the third loop. And again, I marked my last stitch with a stitch marker, so I'm going to take that out, do my last half double crochet, pop that back in to mark that last stitch, and then slip stitch over to the first half double crochet of the round. And that's the end of round 8. For round 9, exactly the same, chain 1, and we're going to do a half double crochet into the third loop of that stitch. Front, back, keep turning, and there's our third loop. Mark that as it's our first stitch of the round, and then again half double crochets into the third loop of every stitch on this round. You can pause the video here, continue to do your half double crochets in that third loop, and I will see you when you get closer to the end of this round. Just completing my final round with my last few half double crochets into the third loop. And this is my stitch marker, so I know it's my final stitch. Into there, and then slip stitch into the first half double crochet of the round. And that completes my headband. If you are leaving here, I thank you for joining me. I hope that this has been a valuable tutorial. If you would like to stay for my next little clip, I'm just going to add how to finish off this headband. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you in my other Pamper projects or my other videos. To complete my headband and to finish off, I cut my yarn, giving it a bit of distance, and then all I do from my slip stitch is I pull it straight through. Thread this onto a darning needle, and what I'm going to do is an invisible finish. So I slip stitched into this stitch here. You can see that. What I want to do is take my darning needle, go through both loops of the next stitch, pull that through, and then back up through just the back loop of this stitch here. And as you can see by that, that pretty much gives us an invisible finish. You can't tell where I've ended my work. Turn my work over, and I now want to secure this in the back. So some tips for this. What I recommend is working through stitches in one direction, turning and working back, turning and working back. This helps to keep your work nice and firm. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit because what I want to make sure I do is work behind one of these rows, so I'm not going to bring my yarn through. So I'm just going to go in behind these stitches, go through a few in one direction, get that one through there, and what I want to do is turn it over, make sure my needle is not coming through. It is a little bit at the start, so I think I will change that. Might bring it up and work through the back of these ones. So working through backs of these stitches, go a few in one direction, check, needle hasn't come through the front, so that's going to be fine. And then I want to turn it over, come back. Don't go back in through the exact same stitch, otherwise you'll just undo those ones that you've done. So working back through those stitches, can even go across to the other side. Using my finger so I can feel it hasn't gone through to the front of my work. Bring that through, change direction, back again, through a few of those stitches, and then cut off that excess yarn. And that's how I finish off my work. I've already sewn in all of my other ends, all sewn in and invisible on the other side. Thank you for joining me. Hope that this has been valuable. If you have enjoyed it and you found it to be beneficial, please leave a comment below. Thank you.